Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. My name is Satori, and Rennie already went through the bio. I'm an art therapist. Show of hands, all who know what art therapist is, what an art therapist does. Yes, some idea. Okay, so in my experience, people usually have some idea, or they may have a warped idea from TV or whatnot. But people don't actually know what art therapy is because it's not very well represented down here in terms of there aren't very many practicing art therapists. Some people don't even realize that we have these services available here in Trinidad and Tobago. So I have up there the definition according to the British Association for Art Therapists. As Reddy would have mentioned, I studied in London, so art therapy is not available regionally as a training program as yet. If you want to study art therapy, you usually have to go to the UK or the US at the moment. But that's the definition there. Art therapy is a form of psychotherapy that uses visual art media as its primary mode of communication. It involves the use of visual and tactile media as a means of self-expression. Art therapists and art psychotherapists aim to enable clients both to discover an outlet for often complex and confusing emotions that cannot always be expressed verbally, and to foster self-awareness and growth. And the American Art Therapy Association would add that it is used to explore feelings, reconcile emotional conflicts, foster self-awareness, manage behavior and addictions, develop social skills, improve reality orientation, reduce anxiety, and increase self-esteem. Basically what this means is that I use art and the art-making process as an additional medium for building relationships with my clients and patients. Okay, so we're talking psychological intervention and psychological health. Given today's audience, which I'm told are budding young scientists and science students, and I see some older, young at heart scientists as well. I thought it would be remiss of me to ignore the criticisms and very much ongoing debate as to whether psychology and the psychological professions are correctly classified as science or pseudoscience. My intention is not to weigh in on this well-documented debate that has been raging since the inception of psychology, except to say that I started my journey to this profession right where you are now, which is largely as a science student. Okay, my first degree was actually in biology. I studied in New York at a liberal arts college. And while I was getting that bio degree, because it was a liberal arts college, I actually did a number of art electives. So I had the opportunity to revisit that artistic side of me. And what I found is that doing art along with the scientific study really helped me to cope with that mechanical side of thinking. So for me, art wasn't just merely about the academic. It became a minor, but it wasn't about the academic pursuit so much as it actually helped me to achieve the goal of getting my first degree. So much so that when I came back home, I actually kind of rejected the science for a while and tried to make it as a practicing artist. But there's a reason they call it a struggling artist, and I struggled a lot. And eventually, I kind of wanted to bring back that scientific thought and kind of marry it with that artistic side of myself, and which is how I ended up learning about art psychotherapy and pursuing it. All right, so getting back to today's presentation, what I intend to focus on, as counterintuitive as it may seem to you scientists and science students, is the art in art psychotherapy. And one of the themes running through the presentation today is the idea of art versus science, or rather the questioning as to why we've come to see the two as separate or even opposing things. All right, so we'll start it with a quote from none other than Einstein himself, who said, All religions, arts, and sciences are branches of the same tree. All these aspirations are directed towards ennobling man's life, lifting it from the sphere of mere physical existence and leading the individual towards freedom. All right? And Einstein also noted that the greatest scientists are also artists as well. But I like this quote especially because he used the analogy of trees. Right? So have you ever heard the expression, can't see the forest for the trees? When somebody misses the forest for the trees? It's usually used when, to say that sometimes you miss the bigger picture when you focus on the details too much. And I guess the vice versa is true, where you may be focused on the details and not seeing the bigger picture. So, as we go along, I want you to consider art and science as two trees in the same forest, or as Einstein put it, two branches in the same tree. All right? So today's presentation is called, So an Art Therapist Asks You to Draw a Tree. And naturally, as you might expect, we'll start with me, the art therapist, asking you to draw a tree. Okay, so while we're getting that, we're going to have 5 to 10 minutes. I'll keep the time. And you're going to try to draw your best tree. Now, it doesn't matter if you're artistic or if you can't draw, as some of you might think you all are. The goal is not going to be to judge your artistic ability. All right? While I know the temptation may be strong to look at what your peers are doing, I'm asking that you try as far as possible to work individually and in private. Okay, so what do we think will happen with these drawings here now? Okay, so in my experience, the common misconception I think is you all will expect me now, the art therapist, to interpret and diagnose and say what's wrong with each one of you by looking at your drawings, right? And that's not exactly how it works, but yes, projective drawings are a thing. And I'm reading here now from the Psychodiagnostics and Personality Assessment Handbook, right? Tree drawings reflect unconscious self-evaluations, according to Hammer. People tend to draw trees towards which they feel maximum empathetic identification. Here, the overall clinical impression frequently may be even more important than with drawings of houses or people. So some of you all might have heard about the house tree person test that is usually administered by psychologists. Some of the most penetrating psychological analyses of interpersonal, intrapersonal, and environmental adjusting may be made from drawn trees. All right? So I have a couple pages from the manual. So we can read some of it, and maybe you can look at your drawings and see if anything applies to what you've drawn. All right? Now, these manuals are quite extensive, so I'm going to read a brief part of it. So, did anybody have apple trees? All right, so we have a couple apple trees. So apple trees by adults, apple trees suggest, and this is drawn by adults, nurturance concerns, perhaps a desire for children, and these are sometimes drawn by pregnant women, though fruit may have also been drawn in trees by suspicious women. Well, we don't really have any children here, but in children it would have suggested dependency needs, or if apples have fallen, feelings of rejection. Any Christmas trees? No Christmas trees? Okay, that's good, because Christmas trees suggest dependency needs, although these are less interpretive consequence during Christmas season. We know any Christmas season, but none of you all did Christmas trees, so that's good. Any dead trees? Okay. So dead trees can suggest dead trees drawn by individuals who are very disturbed psychologically these drawings may be associated with depressive or guilt feelings, possibly suicidal tendencies, severe futility and apathy with profound inadequacy and inferiority feelings, withdrawal, and some schizophrenic conditions. Did we have any dogs urinating on the trees? No? Okay, because that suggests aggressive character. Okay, so looking at the size of the trees now, any enormous trees? Right, so it says here enormous trees suggest possible aggressive tendencies, overcompensatory actions, fantasy, or both, with probable hypersensitivity, a possible desire to dominate, and in children to defy authority figures. Okay, did we have any trees drawn in a sink or depression? In a valley, like you put your tree in a valley. Okay, so that should just inadequacy feelings, depressive feelings. Did we have any on a hilltop or isolated on top of a hill? All right. So that would suggest the opposite, which is possible feelings of grandiosity and superiority. Right. What else? If a tree is small, any small trees? Yeah. Okay, so possible maternal dependence. Right. Okay, so now we're going to look at where our tree is leaning. Is our tree leaning to the left? Straight trees, okay. So leaning to the left suggests personality imbalance due to a desire for impulsive emotional satisfaction or acting out tendencies or fixations on past or fear of future. Leaning to the right suggests personality imbalance due to fear of impulsive emotionality or desire to repress unpleasant memories. All right, what else? Partly uphill. Do we have any phallic trees? We're just going to leave it at that. No phallic trees, right? Okay. Shadows cast by a tree. No shadows? You have shadows? It suggests anxiety, unless it was added after you added a sun. It's all here in this manual, right? What else? Any trees drawn from above, a view from above? So we all had a standard view. I didn't give any direction, so you know. Any wind-blown trees? No wind in the pictures. Okay, so that was going to suggest feelings at the mercy of the environment, right? So you'll get the idea. Like I said, these manuals are very extensive, so they actually go into treatment of parts of trees, the roots, the branches, all of it's suggesting different things. So three primary postulates serve as the basic theoretical underpinnings for this type of projective drawings. First, man tends to view the environment in an anthropomorphic ways. Even in instances where we know better, when we function in our everyday uncritical manner, we tend to perceive human characteristics in non-human elements of the environment, right? So that's the first postulate. The second postulate is projection is the mechanism operating to effect this anthropomorphic perceptual process, right? So individuals more or less unconsciously attribute their own characteristics, feelings, and motives to these non-human inanimate objects. All right. And finally, though distortions of some degree will be manifest in every perception, they will be greater as a function of projection. The greater the need to project, the more psychological factors will influence the individual's response via the perceptual field. Perceptual distortions will manifest in many aspects of the individual's behavior, including drawings. Right? Furthermore, although every projection contains distortions of some degree, emotionally disturbed individuals tend to project so as to increase the magnitude of distortions. So basically what they're saying is that the more disturbed somebody might be, the more stressed, the more traumatized, the more they're likely to project their own psychological reality onto inanimate objects. And in drawing or in art making, sometimes these projections get put on the artwork. All right? All drawings, whether or not they are intended to be representational, contain the same distorting effects of psychological factors. So even normal people project, right? These modifications of drawings by normals tend to be minor and sometimes deliberate. When a projection is defensively given by an emotionally disturbed person, drawings will be distorted to a higher degree, right? So schizophrenics probably produce the most grotesque drawing distortions of any group of human beings. Interpretations of projective drawings will also derive from the utilization of symbols. So I'm sure some of you all might have had things in addition to trees in your drawings, maybe a squirrel or fruit or something. Symbolic meanings have been derived from culture, idioms of speech, our folklore, and psychoanalytic, anthropological, and psychological research. So for me, this was one of the criticisms I have and why I don't actually use projective drawings, because in our culture, this book has, for example, nothing on coconut trees, right? And I'm sure we have a number of coconut trees out there, right? So although interpretation, all right, to develop construct validity for projective drawings, investigators have used 3 classes of criteria, right? So these studies have all come from empirical studies, clinical case histories, and support from theoretical rationales, right? But again, it's specific to a certain culture in a certain time. This book is actually from 2004, so it may have been updated since. But what do you all think? What do you all think about projective drawings, and would they good predictors do you think, in your personality or? Yes? You're not? Are you sure? Okay. Right, so my take on this is that they do have their place. These type of drawings are usually used not necessarily by art therapists, but by psychologists, and usually for assessment purposes. So we're not really getting into therapy as yet, but maybe before or leading into therapy, where a diagnosis may be necessary as a starting point. Of course, these kind of things wouldn't necessarily be good for therapy itself, because a lot of therapy is about moving past certain things, and it's not about labeling somebody necessarily with a diagnosis. A lot of what we do in therapy as therapists is based on the relationship that develops between the patient and the therapist. So therapy happens over a long period of time. It's not just a snapshot based on any one drawing. The tree that you draw now is not a tree that you're probably going to draw later or tomorrow, right? So therapy is a long-term process. So projective drawings, yes and no. It's there, but it's not the extent of what I do as an art therapist. Any questions before I want to get on to the second half of the presentation, which is where I want to actually want to show you a little bit more about what context means in the process. And we're going to do this by looking at some more trees and kind of just sussing out the context behind it and what stories they tell. So in the second part of the presentation, we're going to look at some trees, this time with context to help illuminate us. All right, so the first tree we're going to look at is this tree here. Okay. All right, so what you're looking at here is an example of prehistoric art. All right. We have another example here. Okay, so prehistoric art is all the art produced in pre-literate, prehistorical cultures beginning somewhere in the very late geological history, and generally continuing until the culture either develops writing or some other method of record keeping, or makes significant contact with another culture that has, so their events can be recorded, right? So it's before history was recorded, except it was recorded in these drawings. These particular pieces are from a prehistoric cave, the prehistoric cave paintings in Serra de Capivara National Park, which is in Brazil. It's an example of cave paintings where we can't know the exact purpose for the artist doing these paintings. Some theories hold that cave paintings may have been a form of communication, while other theories ascribe them a religious and ceremonial purpose. The paintings are remarkably similar all around the world, commonly depicting impressive animals. Humans occasionally appear. But these particular pieces are exceptions because they portray trees, which is a rarity among rarities, basically. Specifically, small human figures holding onto and dancing around a tree, which is this one, possibly involved in some form of ritual dance. All right? Now, usually, wild animals and human figures dominate rock art and are incorporated into often complex scenes involving hunting, supernatural beings, sexual activity, and dancing. But these trees are thought to be some of the oldest depictions of trees, at least in the Americas, right? The age of the cave paintings is something of a mystery, as many of the paintings in the area have been dated by scientists to be older than 25,000 years. But there was a problem with that, because according to a majority of the archaeological evidence, humans only migrated to the Americas around 15,000 years ago. Right? So this is a new find and is a bit controversial. But nonetheless, it's a fascinating find. For me, it's interesting to think about what this depiction meant to the people that did it. What were they really trying to communicate? You all have any guesses as to what they kept me? It's just fascinating to think about. Like, for example, this one, they actually seem to be kind of worshiping the tree in a way. This one, they might be beating the animal with the tree, I don't know. Right? But yeah, so this is art with an archival purpose, right? It's art recording and communicating information through time, right? So let's move along to this tree. So does anyone have trees resembling this maybe? Any of your trees look like this one? Okay, so this image was actually done by Leonardo DaVinci, right? It was taken from one of his notebooks, which was written in 1478, written between 1478 and 1518. So we may be more familiar with Leonardo as the great Renaissance painter who gave us the Mona Lisa, right? But Leonardo was the quintessential Renaissance man, right? The Renaissance being the period of European history covering the span between 14th and 17th centuries, marking the end of the Middle Ages and ushering the age of Enlightenment and modern history as we kind of know it. During this time, new thinking became manifest in art, architecture, politics, science, and literature, all of which flourished, right? So we all heard about the Renaissance, right? That period. So we know about Michelangelo and all these people. Right. Actually, science as we knew it began during this time as well, right? This is when the process of discovery that we now know as the scientific method was being developed. That is the method that is, of course, focused on empirical evidence and the importance of mathematics, right? And which superseded what came before it was Aristotelian science. So yeah, in this time, science and art were intermingled, right? And the authorities were people like Da Vinci who were called polymaths, right? And that was really a name for a person of wide-ranging knowledge or learning, right? So Leonardo, for example, made observational drawings of anatomy and nature, set up controlled experiments in water flow, medical dissection, and systematic study of movement and aerodynamics. So we might have seen some of his flying machines. Those are popular pieces of art as well. He devised principles of research method that led some people to actually classify him as the father of modern science. Other examples of Da Vinci's contribution during this period include machines designed to saw marble and lift monoliths, and new discoveries in acoustics, botany, geology, anatomy, and mechanics. All right. So getting back to this tree picture now. This is from one of the pages of his notebook, and it depicts his rule of trees. Right? I don't know if you all have heard of that one. That one is a little bit more obscure. But his rule of trees, and that's what that passage in the corner there elaborates on, is that it states that as trees grow, the thickness of all the branches at a certain height is equal to the thickness of its trunk, or the mother branch, right? And he made this observation just from looking at trees in nature. And this observation itself has fascinated science all the way up to now. So if we fast forward 500 years to 2011, a French scientist actually used computer-generated models and concluded that trees do, in general, follow Leonardo's formula. And they do so in order to help them withstand wind. All right? Another scientist, also in 2011, and his team discovered a secret in the trees. Hidden among and within the architecture of the branches are fundamental rules that link the size, shape, age, and in fact everything about a single tree to all trees in a forest. Understanding these rules has allowed the scientist and his team to make accurate predictions about how plants and even whole forests work, in particular how they flux carbon dioxide, right? So it was a fairly big discovery there. The scientists noted, if you know something about the branching network, you can make predictions about the whole plant's functioning. Then you can extend that understanding to the ecology of the entire forest. He specifically noted that Leonardo da Vinci was the first person to point this out. He discovered that if you have these constant branching ratios, you are able to draw a realistic tree. And some of the rules are known as Leonardo's rules. But few have really been explored. Few have really explored the functional implication of these rules. All right? So here we have art, an example of art as a medium for investigating the world around us. Right? It's the tool of the polymath, and it's closely linked to science in this time. Moving along to this tree. Any guesses as to who may have produced this tree? Very good guess. So this is a Mulberry Tree by Vincent van Gogh. We might know Van Gogh as the post-impressionist painter who, this is him here, a self-portrait, who painted one of the most popular paintings ever, Starry Night. And he's also famous for self-mutilating his left ear. Right? Both the self-portrait, which may have been his last, and the Mulberry Tree and Starry Night were done in the aftermath of a December 1888 breakdown that resulted in the self-mutilation of his left ear and his voluntary admission to a lunatic asylum, right? Van Gogh painted the Mulberry Tree in October of 1889, less than a year before he would die. Like most of his art, it was done during a period of highs and lows, painted during the time of great self-awareness, and yet he was surrounded by a lot of chaos in the asylum. While at St. Remy, which is the asylum, he wrote to his brother Theo about his state of mind, his new works, and the people around him. In the letters, he acknowledged that he has been in a bad place mentally, but he feels he's getting a lot better. Seeing all the other patients with similar issues made him feel like he was not alone. So the constant in Van Gogh's life was painting, and he continued it during his stay at the asylum. He painted all aspects of his life: the doctors, the hallways, the flowers in the gardens, the wheat fields, the trees, and of course this mulberry tree. All right. In October of 1889, so he was still in the asylum, he sent a few paintings, he called them studies, to his brother. In all the words describing this mulberry tree and the time he painted it, he seems to be happy. In fact, he writes, I'll tell you that we're having some superb autumn days and that I'm taking a great advantage of them. So in December, he sends a few paintings home to his brother, but it's the mulberry tree that he says is his favorite. And we could compare this tree to another painting of his, which is of tree roots, and done in July of 1890, which was 2 months after he checked out of the asylum. And this was actually done in the month of his suicide. So Van Gogh committed suicide, and this is believed to be his last painting. A lot more chaotic, as you can see. Though he died broke with his madness and genius largely unappreciated in his time, he attained widespread critical and commercial and popular success over the ensuing decades, and is remembered as an important but tragic painter whose troubled personality typifies the romantic ideal of the tortured artist. As one of the pillars of post-impressionism, he used color and vibrant swirling brushstrokes to convey his feelings and state of mind, and was therefore a major influence for the expressionist movement which came after post-impressionism. The influence of the impressionist impulse on the history of art in general, and in art therapy in particular, has been extensive, most notably with the emphasis placed on originality and self-expression. So here we have art as a conduit for emotions and our subjective experience, right? So it's an ally of our own innate originality and creativity and expression. Okay, moving along. Okay, so this is a musk tree done by Marianne North. Beyond the use of art to document scientific progress, Marianne North's paintings of tropical plants served as both historic and scientific records, Active in the mid and late 19th century, North traveled extensively on her own, which was a feat in this time unheard of for a woman. I don't know why they mentioned that. She was never formally trained in painting, but her talent and productivity produced over 800 paintings that currently hang in the Marianne North Gallery in Kew Gardens, London. Her work transcends traditional plant specimens, which are collected, dried, and preserved in herbaria and used to establish record of species. While those samples document discovery and provide a necessary historic record, North's brilliantly colored paintings bring those species to life in their natural habitat as part of their ecosystem. Charles Darwin considered North's paintings to be excellent examples of his theory of natural selection. One can see quite clearly from her work the adaptations that tropical plants have made to survive in different areas of the world and the similarities between geographically close species. North has maintained a legacy not only through her artwork, but also several species of which she provided the first illustration that were later named for her. The scientific accuracy with which she documented plant life in all parts of the world before photography became a practical option gives her work a permanent value. A number of plant species are named in honor of her. Right? So, here we have art that kind of brings together all these themes. It's archival. It's based on North's subjective experience, but it also has an objective application and has been used to investigate the world around us. And last piece we have here is a tree mandala from Carl Jung in his Red Book. So, have we heard about Carl Jung? No? Okay, so Carl Jung was a Swiss psychiatrist and psychoanalyst who founded analytical psychology. His work has been influential not only in psychiatry, but also in anthropology, archaeology, literature, philosophy, and religious studies. He's the contemporary of Freud, right? So have we heard about Freud? Right. At one point, he was Freud's apprentice and would-be successor until they eventually had a falling out and departure in their theories. He is one of the pillars of psychodynamics. Psychodynamics being, in the broader sense, an approach to psychology that emphasizes systematic study of psychological forces that underlie human behavior, feelings, and emotions, and how they might relate to early experience. It is especially interested in the dynamic relations between conscious motivation and unconscious motivation. So we actually come in full circle here, back to projective drawings and the projection that happens. It's all based on theories developed by Jung and Freud and other people about the unconscious and how the unconscious works. Mandalas are found, let's give some more examples of mandalas in his book. Mandalas are found in the art of many religious traditions where they are employed in the service of personal growth and spiritual transformation. Jung considered the mandala to be an expression of the self and an archetypal symbol of wholeness. He used mandalas as a therapeutic tool and believed creating mandalas helped his patients to make the unconscious conscious. And he not only did this with his patients, but actually it was a big part of his own experience, because in the aftermath of his split with Freud, Jung had his own psychotic episode, which for him was a creative illness, if not a period of great introspection. This is when he compiled the Red Book, a red leather-bound manuscript crafted between 1915 and 1930, which recounted and commented upon the author's imaginative experiences during the time. During the period in which he worked on this book, Jung developed his principal theories of the archetypes, collective unconscious, and the process of individuation, which are key concepts in psychology that we use. So speaking about the Red Book and that time of his life, this is what he said. The years when I pursued my inner images were the most important time of my life. Everything else is to be derived from this. It began at that time, and the later details hardly matter anymore. My entire life consisted in elaborating what had burst forth from the unconscious and flooded me like an enigmatic stream and threatened to break me. That was the stuff and material for more than only one life. Everything later was merely the outer classification, scientific elaboration, and the integration into my life. But the numinous beginnings, which contained everything, was then. All right. So here we see art as a psychological healing tool, and a means of engaging the unconscious and making it conscious. All right. Okay, so to recap, we've explored art as archival, a collection or store record of valuable historical information, a medium for investigating a medium for investigating, a tool of the polymath, a gauge for shifts in our thinking that we can reflect on rationally, and we can reflect rationally on our emotions. We've seen art as a conduit for emotions and subjective experience, as a universal communicator and as common ground, and as a psychological tool. These ideas and functions may seem self-evident to us, and we can actually sometimes take them for granted. But some time ago, they weren't the actual norm, or they were met with resistance due to prevailing ideas that preceded them. What we begin to see here is the inexhaustible quality of art, which, much like science, but in its own way, of course, expands to include new knowledge and experience. That is, art evolves as we do. So the point I'm trying to make here is that artistic process has accompanied us historically for even as long as we've accompanied each other as social beings. It has not only illuminated communication and communicated every thought, idea, and shift in the history of mankind, but it has in turn informed it. This same potential, no more and no less, is what art therapists attempt to harness on an individual level in a therapy room. And I will leave you with a quote. You tell me of an invisible planetary system in which electrons gravitate around a nucleus. You explain this world to me with an image, and I realize that you have been reduced to poetry, so that science that was to teach me everything ends up as a hypothesis. That lucidity founders in metaphor, and that uncertainty is resolved in a work of art. All right, so that's just something to consider. And that's what I want to leave you all with today.